And we are going to announce our next session, which is the good, bad, and ugly of AI SEO. And we have not one, but two speakers here who are Mark William Cooks, director at Kenda, and Daniel Foley-Carter, director at Assertive. Hello, guys. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for inviting us on.
Hey, good to be here.
Great having you here. Thanks for joining. You can start just now. The stage is yours, but please tell a few words about yourself before that.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to go first, Daniel? We've also we've got a few slides. I don't know if you can get them up for us when you get a second. Thank you. Do you want to go first, Dan?
I'll let you go first.
Sure. So as I was kindly introduced, I'm Mark Williams Cook. I've been working in SEO for around about 20 years. I'm director of Canda, which is a specialist SEO agency, and founder of Also Asked, which is a keyword research or intent research, I should say, tool.
My name is Daniel Foley-Carter. I run the agency Assertive and SEO Audits.io. And I've been in the SEO industry since the late 90s. I spend pretty much most of my life just writing stuff for LinkedIn and doing audits and trying to build a new search console tool. Absolutely love SEO and really happy to be here.
So as our slide says there, we are going to attempt to take questions as we go. So Daniel and I can see the chat from both LinkedIn and YouTube. So if you've got questions, pop them in. We're going to cover the good, the bad, the ugly of AI SEO. I know Daniel's got some opinions and I have some as well. We actually haven't talked too much before this because I just wanted to kind of see how it went, and I didn't want us agreeing maybe on everything before we started. But I think the ugly is where we're going to start, which is around misconceptions people have of AI and specifically LLMs, actually. So I think that's an important thing maybe before we start. AI is a huge topic which covers lots of different things. I think in common language people are using now when we're referring to AI, normally it means someone's talking about ChatGPT or Bard. So specifically, we're talking about large language models a lot of the time. And I know I've seen this with Daniel before. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what they are capable of and what they're good at. And I think this, I don't know what you think, Dan, but I think this can cause a lot of problems. I mean, this is an example here where Google actually jumped in, where we had someone saying that, so Bard, which is the system Google's built on their large language model, was having some kind of like direct access into Google, and you could find out which websites it trusts. And I can kind of see with the search generative experience why people might think that, but obviously the large language model is completely separate from all of the internal workings kind of Google and everything they're doing. And we see the same. This was one I picked up on LinkedIn. Again about Bard and this misconception that Bard has access to Google Analytics, Google Search Console, Google Ads. So it's really kind of expanding its capabilities when, again, unless you actually upload that data, as the previous speaker was saying, it doesn't have this kind of connection. I'm not sure if you've seen many examples like this, Dan.
Yeah, I think the thing is that it wouldn't make sense for Bards to have a feedback loop like that. I think the thing is that people can take these things and it's almost hallucinatory. Bard's not going to take a piece of content and then directly give feedback as to whether or not Google likes it. Google Bard and its own AI and its own algorithms for evaluating content are completely split and compartmentalized and kept separate. So I think the thing is with stuff like this as well, I wouldn't say it was dangerous, but I would say it adds to the pool of misinformation, which I think we know in our industry is rife. And if people who are, earlier on in their SEO journey see this kind of thing, and maybe they don't understand large language models, then they could very well go and relay that to other people, relay it to clients, and they could be using this stuff and not realizing that actually it's completely incorrect.
For sure. One resource both Dan and I have shared is actually by someone, I wouldn't say they work in SEO anymore, but by a very smart lady called Brittany Muller. She used to work at Moz, and she departed kind of from the SEO world. I don't know how long though, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, and started getting really into AI, and perfectly timed really now with how everything panned out. And we'll share a link in the chat, but Brittany has a website called Data Sci 101, and it gives a really nice introduction to large language models. And I would beg everybody to go and read this. It's really well written. It's really easy to understand. I've taken this from that site, which around her explanation gives this list of things that large language models are good at and things they are not good at. Now, this obviously applies, I'd say, to kind of the off the shelf, if you like, model you're getting with something like ChatGPT, GPT-4. Not necessarily, well, certainly not if you have like expert systems and if you are feeding specific data in yourself. But the kind of things that LLMs are really good at essentially are, text analysis, summarization of text, classification. Things they are not actually good at are things like high level strategy, maths, certainly. Now, obviously, we've got they keep changing the name, but like the code interpreter for ChatGPT, which helps fix some of these problems. But I still see fairly basic errors when we've been trying to use ChatGPT to do various bits of data analysis. So you have to be really, really, really careful.
I think a really important part of this as well is that we have different levels of AI. Obviously, I know that I guess in the future there would be a movement towards AGI where intelligence can breed further intelligence. But the fact that you take a large language model and then you have the creation of content based on content proximity, then it that's the side of AI that I think is obviously being exploited the most. So I think from when ChatGPT first rolled out, I think it was November last year, and immediately people would use it to generate content and it would look like it was a viable solution. But obviously, if people see a new AI tool and they can ask it to write an article and it can just produce something based on snippets of information that it's been trained on, I think this is where the problems start. And obviously a lot of the things there that it's not good at often need high level consciousness to be able to take that data and have context and process it. And I think this is essentially where now people are starting to realize, after the initial boom of AI and content generation, that it's not all flowers. Basically, it's definitely an area that was exploited without thought.
Thank you for the questions, by the way, we've got coming in. We'll circle back around to some of them because some of them I know we're probably going to cover. So if we get nearer the end and we still haven't answered, pop it back in chat and we'll come back to you. One thing I did want to kind of base a discussion around is actually Brittany's kind of final opinion on this, which she says is unpopular, which is writing content is one of ChatGPT's worst use cases. So what are your thoughts on that, Daniel?
Yeah,
I don't think many people will agree with that.
I think it is, because the problem is that if we were to step back a little bit and say, Google is obviously progressing significantly with AI integration. They have their own large language models. They've just bolted Gemini into Bard. So the thing is that you have AI on the search side of things, obviously using more data, effectively serving results that are going to provide a better experience, which is ultimately the end goal for Google. But then when you look at the content production side of things, I think this is where the interesting split happens, because if you have a large language model and you're asking ChatGPT to write an article, it's not creating something new. It's not creating something of new value. And I think if we took the concept of, we want to rank for something, if there are 5 million sites and they're all going for the same thing, if they all share the same content, they have the same thing, then you don't have new value. And I think this is why the helpful content algo is working to look for new value between results. So if you were to take a traditional SERP, the long running model was that people would look at sites that ranked and would look at them and go, okay, well, we need to do what they're doing. If we take that model and then we apply it to the fact that ChatGPT is basically combining what it's been trained from into what looks like a new article, it's not necessarily going to bring anything new to the table. And I think this is where we're at that transitional phase for using AI for content, where you have lazy people, in respect that, they just think that AI will write everything for them and they put it on the website and that's the end of it. And then I guess alongside the lazy side of it, you could have the spammy side of it. So people that know that it's not going to last long, so they just spam it. And then you'll get people that actually want to leverage it in a proper way, where they'll use AI to perhaps create part of the article framework, and then they'll use an editor to go back and correct that. And I think, that's where we are at the minute, in respect to the whole spectrum of AI and content.
So I think there's two things that I think about that I've been discussing recently. So in the SEO in 2024 book, a colleague of ours, Jono Alderson, his kind of tip for 2024 was around what happens when Google doesn't need to crawl and index your site anymore, because you're dealing with an area that's solved. And the example he gave for this was, for instance, like how to cook a lasagna, right? These large language models have had a lot of input on very common things like how to cook a lasagna. And there's very little value in Google spending, what is lots of money going around crawling, rendering, indexing the web to try and find that information. So there are certain areas of knowledge that are kind of solved. And then the question comes, why would they not just generate the answer with their own LLM rather than sending crawlers out and indexing and serving and ranking content that you've made that is basically exactly the same? So, the only way you can break out of that is in certain areas and not in all areas, like you say, by adding new value. And it's interesting what, you've written here about, large language models are obviously trained on data. They work on this probability curve of picking out the next most likely tokens. They do generate some new stuff, but the problem with the generative stuff is that it is that little bit of randomness baked in, which is then gives us the effect of what people call hallucinations. So if there is a truly random kind of thing added, there's a very not insignificant probability that it's just going to be wrong, which is why sometimes we get really wild things right out of these models. And I think you wanted to make a point as well about this in terms of Google trying to meet user needs, right?
So obviously, Google has various documentation, some of it obviously destined for their own internal quality raters, so that when they deploy an update, they can go and start evaluating, obviously, because results for billions of sites will change. So when we take this data, obviously the quality rater guidelines aren't ranking factors, but when we know that the emphasis there is looking at, the end goal. So we have to say, okay, well, quality rater guidelines are clearly giving insight into the kind of things that people are expected to look for. So if we take needs met, which ultimately is going to be the most important thing, because if Google would never have got where it has if it hadn't been so good in the early days of meeting end user needs. That's why Google outpaced Yahoo, because it was a simpler search experience and the quality of the results was generally better. For Google to have sustained most of its search market share for so long is obviously an achievement, but it's an achievement because they progressively worked harder to serve better quality results. And we know that that doesn't always happen. You know, you've got parasite SEO, you have loads of things like spam getting through the filter, but the end result is, if we are going to serve something to the end user, you know, is that going to satisfy majority intent? Which obviously leads me on to the fact that, you know, when you look at SERPs, for example, you'll get like randomization in intent. So, you know, a portion of people will be satisfied by position 1, position 2. And to then take that needs met, if that's what we work towards as SEOs and copywriters and all the people involved, obviously, that's going to lead to better quality results. And ultimately, it's not just about that, it's also about achieving our goals. You know, if we meet end user needs, we're more likely to sell something through our website or sell a service. And this is where I think there's still a big disconnect between AI and obviously strategy.
Yeah, right. Before we move on to the next section, we've got a couple of questions which we can share out. So Luke says, can you guys discuss how advanced AI technologies like deep learning can be employed in SEO for more nuanced tasks such as user intent prediction or complex query understanding? I want to just try and whip through these a couple quite quickly. So in terms of that, I mean, my view on that is the problem you've kind of mentioned there is primarily a Google problem, because they're the people that are trying to match up and understand the query with the answer. Your understanding of the other important thing is what Daniel just touched on, which is that intent is subjective, not objective, meaning you can have two people type in the exact same search query and it means very different things to them. So there isn't like a correct answer for that. I think the best things you can do in terms of content strategy creation to, you know, in terms of intent are, you know, two things depending what scale you want to go to. I'm a big advocate of using the clustering data Google provides us within People Also Ask data. We'll talk about that more in a minute anyway. And there are tools out there like keywordinsights.ai, which specialize in that intent modeling and clustering if you've got kind of your own data that Google doesn't have anything on. And Daniel, I'll pick one here for you from Marketing Macro at the bottom. It says, do you agree that organic search results will eventually become irrelevant as a traffic source? Why or why not?
So, no, I don't think that that's the case. I think, as with anything in SEO, it will just simply evolve. I think the direction that we're going to head in or head towards over the next 5 to 10 years will be search generative AI, where results are more likely to be personalized based on the data that Google can collect about you and your search behavior. So the previous point where we said intent is subjective, not objective. If Google is able to use AI to generate results that, you know, are far more in tune to what it will expect me to be looking for, fundamentally, I'm going to have a better experience. But those results still need to exist. Google's business model was always built initially on organic, because if they don't have organic, their paid business model doesn't work. So it won't become obsolete. The search behavior will just change, and the format and the presentation of that information will change. And I guess our overall experience will change. And just before we head off, this is one of the reasons why when people said Chat GPT will be a search engine, people will go to that. That's exactly the reason that that won't happen, because it's not a search engine. So Google will just evolve, and our behavioral impact will probably give us more personalized results in the future.
I think that's something Brittany said as well, you know, about them not being search engines. So let's look at the bad. Let's look at some examples of where AI has gone wrong. So we've picked up some cases here. Some are well known, some less well known, of where we've deliberately kind of abused AI just to see what would happen. So this first example, and you have to forgive me, this is a photo of a screenshot in a presentation, because this is my website that's in the picture, but the data's gone from GSC, and the Twitter account I had the picture on got banned. So I had to grab the photo from Lily Ray, who brilliant SEO. She's actually on straight after us, presented at PubCon. So this was an early AI experiment I did before GPT-4 came out. So this was done on GPT-3. It was a site around video games. Basically, I scraped the top 10,000 games on Steam. I then got all of the people also asked questions from Google for all of those games. I fed them into GPT-3, got short answers, published them through the WordPress API to create like 10,000 pages. I tried to do it cautiously, so I was doing chunks of pages every day, although I don't actually think I needed to. Used markup schema, chucked a YouTube video at the top. So technically it was all unique content. It kind of got some of the answers right, some wrong. And the result was basically Google hoovered it up. It indexed around about 3/4 of the site within a few weeks. Got around 9,000 visitors over the period of 12 weeks. Bing actually liked it even more, lower traffic from Bing, but it indexed even more pages very quickly. And then we had a two-step phase where I suddenly lost around about 30% of the traffic. That carried on for a few weeks, and then within 24 hours, it completely tanked to nothing. And as far as I could tell, there was no manual penalty there, no intervention. There was nothing in Search Console. It looks like Google had somehow over this period worked out something was amiss. And there are more examples. So this, I don't normally put the kind of full tweet here, but it's had 7 million views. So I think probably everyone's already seen it. This was kind of the highly talked about SEO heist, which was for a site called causal.app, where they published, I think it was 1,800 AI pieces of content over a very short period. Of course, you can't do realistically any type of QA at that scale. And again, there was a really similar pattern of Google, hoovering up all of this content over a period of months. And interestingly, there's a really similar pattern of a drop by around about 20-30%, another few weeks, and then site completely tanks. And there's one other example, because they're all kind of related, I wanted to show you. So this is the LinkedIn advice pages. And if you don't know about this, LinkedIn has what they call collaborative articles now, which are essentially AI generated articles, which they prompt real people to essentially correct and fact check for them, which is a really interesting middle ground, to be honest, because their argument can be, well, it does have expert experience because we're asking people. The issue I've found with them, because I've looked and commented on probably 100 of the SEO ones, is sometimes the entire premise of the article is just incorrect. So no matter how much correction you do, it's not helpful. Yeah. Again, really quick build up, and then a drop to about 50% of the traffic they got. And I found that particularly interesting. It didn't completely tank out. And I wonder if this is because some of the articles, are actually of passable quality and that the premise was correct. And now you've got 100 comments on them. They do actually serve a purpose. Obviously, yeah. LinkedIn's a fairly big site as well. So it's maybe not a test I would compare myself to. So yeah. The question I guess I want to discuss with everyone is why does this work? Because as much as Google says this is their current guidelines, which is text generated through automated processes without regard for quality or user experience, which I would argue all of these three sites, LinkedIn maybe on the fence, do meet. Yeah. Why does it work? And I know you've got some thoughts about this as well, haven't you, Daniel?
Oh yes, I've done plenty of testing. So I have a theory around quite a lot of this stuff. So I think some of the key things to keep in mind is that if a website has pre-existing history and it's been around for a few years, and over time that site has contributed valuable content, it's accrued links, and it's met intent in various areas, then that almost provides like a platform for Google to semi-trust that content that's being produced. So we know that, you know, when you publish an article on your site, Google will discover it, crawl it, and then it will go. And I think there's a slide for this. It will go through a set of phases in no particular order. But what it does seem to be is that it will crawl. Yeah, here we go.
The chaos slide.
Yeah, the chaos slide. So what will happen is, and this is entirely dependent. So as with anything in SEO, it depends. The rules are never linear. But if we were to generalize without speculating too much, I would say that if a site has pre-existing ground, pre-existing history, then it will have the ability to publish content that doesn't meet the criteria that Google set out. And what will happen is that if it's done at scale, for example, like the casual app example here, then what will happen is that content will be picked up quickly through crawling and indexing. It will go through the basic relevance checks. And as per one of the other slides, they fake it in terms of they don't understand the content initially, and we have to use behavior stuff. But so the content is indexed, basic relevant checks happen. And then because obviously Google has billions of results, it can't continuously do real-time full EEAT evaluation, helpful content evaluation. So there's a period of time that this stuff can exist, and you know, pre-existing trust supports that. But then at a point where Google does a wider evaluation every so often, then as soon as, you know, it fails EEAT, fails aspects of helpful content, that's when we see, you know, a wider impact. And this is why I firmly believe that Google won't just hit the content that has been, you know, done AI spammy. It will actually have a further wider reaching impact on the domain, including pre-existing content. So you'll see there, like page experience signals, other assessments and things are crossed out. So obviously there is no particular answer because we don't know how Google works. But what I suspect is that after the relevance checks and we have EAT helpful content, if those fail, then there's no reason for Google to look at any other signals because content clearly doesn't warrant it. And I think this is that gap period is how these rank and tank sites get away with it. You know, these people publishing case studies.
Let's jump back down to what you said about the Google faking understanding content, because I think it's a really interesting point. So this is actually, again, we'll give the links out to this. It's on Search Engine Land. This is from a Google presentation in 2016, an all hands presentation. It's on the Search Engine Land site. They've gathered these documents from the DOJ antitrust trial. And obviously this is an old document now, 2016. It's a long time in search technology, but it's really interesting. You know, Google is flat out essentially saying, look, we don't understand documents. We have to fake that. And they go into some detail around how they do that. And a lot of this comes from user interaction on the actual SERP. So really specific there, not on the end website, but how people are interacting with SERP. So where they're clicking, how long they're hovering, if they're coming back to the SERP, if they're redefining things, if they're interacting with different SERP features. And obviously it takes time to get user interaction data. So what do they do in the meantime? There are patents already. You can go and view these yourselves. So Google's got a patent for site quality, and how they calculate site quality again is primarily looking at how users search, what words they use. So if people do a search for, say, a product and your brand, that's a good signal that your brand is trustworthy. Same as if your brand is included in an anchor text with those things as well. And they also look at when users click on specific search results. So even though you're not number one, they jump straight to maybe number 3 where you are. That's a signal that your site's of high quality. So what does Google do before they have this data? There is a patent on how they were predicting site quality. And essentially what they were doing was they're using a thing called phrase models, which are based on sites they do have scorings for. So they essentially build a picture of this is what a high quality site looks like. And then when you have new sites come and they don't have they don't have user data, they can run this kind of model against the news sites to work out, does it look like something that we want to rank? And I think this is what Daniel was saying, this gap. And there's even more evidence of this actually in the DOJ trial. So this is from a blog post. Again, we'll link to it by AJ Cohn, who has written some analysis of the testimony Google did during this trial. And there's a lot of reference to blue ring and green ring, which seems to be when Google is culling sites to go through further kind of factors, applying further ranking factors that are possibly more computationally expensive, maybe in terms of computation power and time for them to run. So I think the issue and why we're seeing, results like this is that AI content passes this initial like cheap sniff test, if you like, of the content. It's like, yeah, it's not just spam, it looks fine. But then when we start getting user signals, and when Google has time to apply, there's a lot more stuff now with like Spam Brain, the machine learning stuff they've got, which will be more expensive for them to run. We then see it fall off. So I think that answers, Umar Farouk, your question there around how does the search engine decide it was not helpful for the user? My opinion on that, apart from kind of the whole links discussion, which we're not really talking about, is they're doing a lot of this on user interaction data. And again, as part of that DOJ testimony, they did actually say that the user data is becoming more obsolete now they've got models like BERT.
The other thing I think of as well is that if we look more high level, say for example the argument around links. So there's been obviously a big premise of SEO for a long time was based on links, because links counted as a signal of trust. The more links the site had, the more it could be trusted. But when you look at that model that's been around for 15 plus years, it's probably the most unreliable model now. But when you look at user behavior, and you then have this treasure trove of data, and then Google obviously has large learning models, where you have ChatGPT that's being trained on text. You have Google's own LLMs where they're building it out, and they can take scroll, they can take abandonment, they can take interaction data. And I think the other thing on the previous slide, when you looked at the patent for predicting site quality, this is the other reason why I think AI content strategies are dangerous, especially to pre-existing brands that have a good solid content base already, and then they decide to scale up with AI content. Because fundamentally, if they're scaling up AI content much faster than they produce human-based editorial content, that's going to have a much wider effect on the overall site quality. And I think this is why we see sites get absolutely nuked. So I've seen publications where they'd have 10,000 pages in their index doing really well, and then they would go and add 3, 4, 5,000 AI articles over the space of a year. And then when they were finally hit by helpful content updates, especially earlier in this year, it took out a load of the good content with it. So I think, if I was to say anything with AI, it's entirely feasible to use it to be supportive, but we're not going to see the back of human editorial content. I don't think for a long time yet. I think anyone watching this that has, got their heart set on adopting AI as much as possible, I think the best use cases for AI are definitely around data analysis, looking for correlation and trends. But to create content with it, especially with no human intervention, I think is massively risky, because can ChatGPT understand the context of what someone wants? Can it understand intent like we do? And I think, take EAT, for example, it's clear when you have someone that really knows a topic, they know the kind of things to incorporate, whereas ChatGPT won't necessarily have that foresight. And if you do 1,000 articles and ChatGPT gets some of it right 10% of the time, then those 10% of articles could go on to increase your traffic until obviously we go through the sniff test and then the EAT and so forth.
Should we jump on to some good uses? Because we've got a couple
Yeah,
of
go on.
like, specific things, because we've been kind of throwing shade at AI now for like 40 minutes. So it's
Yeah.
probably a good idea to give some examples. So I've got one that I've mentioned once or twice before now, which, as I mentioned earlier, is using PAA data, because I think this is the mirror I think you can hold up for Google around this is likely what people are going to want to know. Apart from their initial search query. So I think the last data I saw from Google, they said it's like an average of 9 queries it takes to satisfy the overall intent of the search. So one thing I've been using ChatGPT to do is help me audit content. So using Also Asked, I've pulled off, say, for this term around how to clear a scuba mask, like the kind of questions that I'd get. You can export this straight into Google Sheets or download it as a CSV. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, you can upload files now into ChatGPT, or you can give it the URL actually of a Google Sheet. And then there's this whacking long prompt that I give it. And essentially what I'm asking is how many of the questions in that sheet I give it are answered by maybe our URL. And then sometimes I put in a list of competitor URLs that I know are ranking well. And then from that, I've truncated it here just so we've got something nice for a screenshot. But for a particular query, it can show you how many of these questions are answered. And generally, and I really want to find time to do like a proper quantitative study of this, generally what I'm seeing is that sites, especially for the more broader queries, the sites that are ranking are the ones that are answering more of these questions. They're not always relevant. So I'm not saying, you should always aim to answer every single one, because as we said earlier, the intent can be quite subjective. But a really good use for this is because auditing content, if you get a website that's got, 2,000 pages and you set a human to try and determine where the gaps are, it's a really long process. And again, as Daniel said, I would always get a human to do this, but you can use tooling now to at least help prioritize this. So one easy way to do this is using Screaming Frog to crawl all of your content pages, and you can scrape the whole page content, including things like titles and H1s. You can pass them to Also Asked API to get the questions that are related to each of these topics. And then you can pass all of that to ChatGPT through the API and essentially do the same prompt, but for every single page. So in, half an hour, you can get some scoring for your site. And even if you want competitor sites around what your kind of intent coverage is, if you like, I think that's a nice use for AI. It solves a problem around keyword targeting being brittle, because that doesn't reflect how Google works, and it leans into things that AI is really good at. Daniel, I think you had a use case you wanted to go through as well.
Yeah, it was
a slide on this for you.
I think
you might have to talk through it. I'll see if we've got it.
It's okay. It was the windows and doors test.
Yeah, I don't think that's on here, I'm afraid.
It's okay. I can explain it very briefly. So in my use case, what I've been using AI to do a lot of different things. So I've been testing content output. I've been testing structured data output. I've been testing correlation analysis. So one of the really good use cases was that I took a page on this windows and doors site that was written around best hardwood for windows. I dumped out all of the queries into a Google Sheet. Then what I did was I used Google Sheets access as a plugin in ChatGPT, so it could obviously access it. I then asked it to create a correlation between all of the queries that were dumped out from Search Console. Then what I did, very basically, was I did a click gap analysis comparing last 3 months last year to last 3 months this year. And I asked ChatGPT to identify all the queries that were lost and gained. And then using that correlation, I could see how much intent dilution there was because the queries were really loose. So I then fed that to a writer, and then we used a blend of ChatGPT orientated content with human editorial. We narrowed the content down, and then we deployed it back live. And that article very quickly recovered rank. So We used AI in respect of being able to do analysis of data, look for correlation in queries. And then obviously there are loads of other use cases. I've used it to analyze top pages and link data exported from Ahrefs and Majestic. But the Windows and Doors site, if you are in the UK and you Google best wood for Windows, you should see windows-doors-uk.co.uk, any position between 2 and 3, depending on where you search from. Most of that content is actually AI generated with human editorial. And that's one example of a case, where we've used AI to do something good.
Brilliant. I think we're going to try and wrap up there because I know we have the brilliant Barry Schwartz and Lily Ray waiting to come and take the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark and Daniel, for this amazing discussion. Sorry that we haven't covered all the questions that we have in chat, but we have a suggestion. We have an SE ranking community that you can join by the QR code you can see on this slide. And Mark and Daniel, it seems to me you're already there, right? So we can continue the discussion there, and you can cover any questions you're comfortable covering.
More than happy. Thank you for inviting.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thank you.